The night Wilhelmina Foster's groom disappeared, she stood at the window of the Pendleton hotel room in her wedding dress, staring at the empty street below while her world crumbled into dust and disappointment. She had arrived in Pendleton, Oregon just 3 weeks earlier in the summer of 1883, traveling all the way from Philadelphia to marry Thomas Daniels, a man she had courted through letters for 8 months. He had seemed perfect on paper, literally, his words flowing with promises of a good life on his family's cattle ranch, of building something together in this wild country that still felt raw and untamed compared to the civilized East. But now, as dawn broke over the blue mountains in the distance, Thomas was gone, and Wilhelmina was left holding the shattered pieces of her carefully constructed future. Her cousin Margaret burst into the room, her face flushed from running up the stairs. "Willie, the Reverend is here, and half the town is already at the church. What do I tell them?" Wilhelmina turned from the window, her green eyes dry despite the storm raging inside her chest. She had cried all her tears in the dark hours before dawn after she found Thomas's note slipped under her door. The words were burned into her memory. "I cannot do this. I thought I could, but I am not ready to be a husband. Forgive me." No explanation, no real apology. Just a coward's escape in the middle of the night. "Tell them the truth," Wilhelmina said, her voice steady even though her hands trembled as she reached up to remove the delicate lace veil her mother had worn at her own wedding. "Tell them there will be no wedding today." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Willie, I am so sorry. Thomas is a fool." "Yes, he is." Wilhelmina carefully folded the veil, focusing on the simple task to keep herself from falling apart entirely. She had spent everything she had to come west. Her parents were dead, leaving her with just enough inheritance to make the journey and start a new life. She had given up her position as a school teacher, sold most of her belongings, and burned every bridge back east because she believed in the future Thomas had painted in his letters. Now she had nothing. No home, no job, no prospects, and no way back to Philadelphia even if she wanted to return, which she did not. She would not slink back in defeat to face the pitying looks of everyone who had warned her against going west to marry a man she barely knew. A knock at the door made both women turn. Margaret opened it to reveal a tall man in his late 20s, his dark hair slightly disheveled, his blue eyes serious under the brim of his black hat. He wore dusty trail clothes and had clearly just ridden hard, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders with sweat despite the early morning hour. "Miss Foster." His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting over wind and cattle. "I am Nash Daniels, Thomas's brother." Wilhelmina stared at him, recognition flickering through her shock. Thomas had mentioned his older brother in passing, always with a hint of resentment. Nash had been working a ranch in Montana for the past year, sending money home to help keep the family property afloat. According to Thomas, Nash was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one their father had always favored. "Your brother is gone," Wilhelmina said flatly, seeing no point in softening the truth. "He left sometime in the night." Nash's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble on his face. "I know. I found his note at the ranch house when I arrived this morning. I rode straight through the night to get here from Montana when I got Pa's telegram about the wedding, and instead of greeting my brother, I found a letter saying he had run off to California." California. Thomas had not even had the decency to tell Wilhelmina where he was going. Just that he was leaving her. "I am sorry you wasted your journey," Wilhelmina said, turning back to the window because looking at Nash hurt somehow. He looked enough like Thomas to remind her of her humiliation, but there was something different in his eyes, something solid and steady that his younger brother had lacked. "I did not waste anything," Nash said quietly. I came because I wanted to meet the woman my brother was going to marry. The woman he wrote about in his letters home. Wilhelmina's throat tightened. He wrote about me, he did. Said you were smart and brave and beautiful and that he did not deserve you. Nash stepped into the room, ignoring Margaret's startled gasp at the impropriety. Turns out he was right about that last part, at least. Wilhelmina needs to go tell everyone the wedding is cancelled, Margaret said quickly, shooting Nash a warning look. This is hardly the time for visitors. Wait. Nash pulled off his hat, turning it in his hands. Miss Foster, I have a proposition for you. Wilhelmina turned to face him fully, her wedding dress rustling around her legs. I am not interested in your pity, Mr. Daniels. It is not pity. Nash met her gaze directly, and Wilhelmina saw something unexpected there, determination mixed with a hint of desperation. My family's ranch needs help. We have been barely scraping by since my mother died 2 years ago and my father's health is failing. Thomas was supposed to take over the day-to-day running of the place, but he never had the spine for hard work. He was always looking for an escape. What does this have to do with me? You came here to start a life. You gave up everything back east, did you not? When Wilhelmina nodded slowly, Nash continued. Then you need a place to land, same as our ranch needs someone with sense. Thomas told us you managed your father's household finances after your mother died, that you taught school, that you know how to work hard. You want to hire me? Wilhelmina asked, confused. No, Nash took a breath. I want to marry you. The room went silent except for Margaret's shocked gasp. Wilhelmina stared at Nash Daniels, certain she had misheard him. You cannot be serious, she finally managed. I am completely serious. Nash held his hat against his chest like a shield. The reverend is at the church. The guests are gathered. You are already wearing a wedding dress. The only thing that needs to change is the groom. You are insane, Wilhelmina whispered, but something flickered in her chest. Not hope exactly, but possibility. Maybe, Nash agreed. But think about it practically. You need a home and a fresh start. My family needs help keeping our ranch running. We can make this a business arrangement, a partnership. I will give you my name, protection, and a place in this territory. You can help us save our land. When things are stable, if you want to leave, we can arrange something. This is madness. Margaret grabbed Wilhelmina's arm. Willie, you cannot marry a complete stranger. I was going to marry Thomas, and he was nearly a stranger too, Wilhelmina pointed out, her mind racing. She looked at Nash, studying him carefully. He had honest eyes and work-hardened hands, and he stood there offering her a lifeline when she was drowning. Why would you do this? You do not know me. I know enough. Nash's voice was steady. I know my brother was an idiot to run. I know you were brave enough to cross half the country for a chance at a life out here. I know our ranch needs someone smart and capable, and Thomas wrote that you were both. He paused, then added quietly, and I know what it feels like to have your plans destroyed and need a second chance. Something in his tone made Wilhelmina look closer. There was old pain in his eyes, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. What happened to you? She asked. That is a story for another time if you say yes. Nash met her gaze. I am not asking you to love me, Miss Foster. I am asking you to take a chance on building something real instead of going back east in defeat or trying to make it alone in a town where everyone will whisper about you being jilted. I will stay. I will keep my word. That is more than my brother gave you. Wilhelmina's heart pounded. This was absolutely insane. Marrying Nash Daniels would be jumping from one impossible situation into another. But he was right about one thing. She had no good options left. She could try to find work in Pendleton, but jobs for women were scarce, and her reputation was already damaged. She could try to go back east, but she would arrive penniless and humiliated. Or she could take this wild chance Nash was offering her. At least he was being honest about what he wanted. This would be a business arrangement, not a love match. There would be no pretending, no false promises. Just hard work and partnership. "If I agree," Wilhelmina said slowly, "I want your word that you will treat me with respect, that I will have a real say in the running of your household and ranch, that this will be a true partnership, not you taking on a servant." "You have my word," Nash said immediately. "And if things do not work, if we find we cannot stand each other, you will help me establish myself somewhere else. You will not trap me. I will not trap you. You will have your freedom if you need it." Wilhelmina looked at Margaret, who was staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Willie, you cannot," her cousin whispered. But Wilhelmina could. She had come west to be brave, to build a new life, to stop being the careful, cautious girl she had been in Philadelphia. Thomas had stolen one future from her, but Nash was offering her another. Different, unexpected, and terrifying, but real. "All right," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I will marry you, Nash Daniels." Nash's shoulders relaxed slightly, relief flickering across his face. "Thank you. I promise I will do right by you. See that you do." Wilhelmina reached for her veil, her hands no longer trembling. "We should go before the Reverend gives up and goes home." The walk from the hotel to the church felt surreal. Margaret kept trying to talk Wilhelmina out of her decision, but Wilhelmina barely heard her cousin's protests. She was too busy watching Nash's straight back as he walked ahead of them, clearing a path through the curious townspeople who had gathered in the street. Word had clearly spread about Thomas's disappearance, and people were staring, whispering behind their hands. Nash ignored them all, his jaw set, his stride purposeful. When they reached the church, he held the door open and met Wilhelmina's eyes. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. "I do not change my mind," Wilhelmina replied, and walked past him into the church. The small building was packed with people, most of whom Wilhelmina did not know. They had come for Thomas, to witness his wedding to the mysterious bride from back east. Now they sat in stunned silence as Nash and Wilhelmina walked down the aisle together. The Reverend, an elderly man with kind eyes, waited at the front. He looked confused but not disapproving as Nash explained the situation in a low voice. After a moment, the Reverend nodded. "Well," he said, raising his voice so the congregation could hear, "it seems we have had a change of groom but not of heart. Miss Wilhelmina Foster and Mr. Nash Daniels have agreed to marry today instead. If anyone has objections, speak now." The church remained silent, though Wilhelmina could feel the weight of dozens of stares on her back. She kept her eyes forward, her chin up, refusing to show any shame. She had done nothing wrong. Thomas was the coward who ran. She was the one being brave enough to move forward. Very well. The Reverend opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Wilhelmina. She had heard them 100 times at other people's weddings, never imagining her own would happen like this. Beside her, Nash stood solid and still, his deep voice steady when he repeated his vows. When it was her turn, Wilhelmina spoke clearly, meaning every word even though this was not the wedding she had imagined. "You have a ring?" the Reverend asked Nash. Nash hesitated, then pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he said quietly to Wilhelmina. "She would have wanted you to have it." Wilhelmina's throat tightened as Nash slid the warm ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her hand. She looked up at Nash and saw something vulnerable in his eyes, a flash of grief quickly hidden. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Oregon, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "You may kiss your bride." Nash looked at Wilhelmina, a question in his eyes. She gave a tiny nod, and he leaned down to press a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief, respectful, and somehow more intimate than Wilhelmina had expected. His lips were warm, and he smelled like leather and sage and wind. Then it was done. They were married. Wilhelmina was now Mrs. Nash Daniels, tied to a man she had met less than an hour ago. The congregation erupted into uncertain applause as they walked back down the aisle. Outside the church, people crowded around to offer congratulations that felt more like curiosity. Wilhelmina smiled and nodded, accepting their well wishes while her mind spun with the reality of what she had just done. "We should head to the ranch," Nash said, appearing at her elbow. "It is about an hour's ride from town. Do you need to collect your belongings?" "Everything I own is at the hotel," Wilhelmina said. "2 trunks and a carpet bag. I will get them." Nash looked around the crowd until he spotted a stocky man with graying hair and a weathered face. "Miss Foster, this is our neighbor, Henry Thornton. Henry, this is my wife, Wilhelmina." The words "my wife" sent a jolt through Wilhelmina. Henry Thornton grinned and shook her hand with genuine warmth. "Welcome to Pendleton, Mrs. Daniels. Your husband is a good man. His father will be mighty relieved to meet you." "Thank you," Wilhelmina said, unsure what else to say. Nash arranged for Henry to bring Wilhelmina's trunks out to the ranch later, then led her to where 2 horses were tied outside the church. One was a big roan gelding, clearly Nash's mount. The other was a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. "This is Daisy," Nash said, stroking the mare's nose. "She was supposed to be for Thomas's wife, but I suppose she is yours now. Do you ride?" "I learned as a girl," Wilhelmina said, eyeing the horse uncertainly. "But it has been years, and I never rode in a dress like this." Nash considered, then swung up onto his horse. "Ride with me, then. We can work on your riding later." He reached down, and Wilhelmina took his hand. His grip was strong and calloused as he pulled her up behind him with surprising ease. She settled onto the horse's back, very aware of how close she was to Nash, how she had to put her arms around his waist to stay balanced. "Hold tight," he said, and urged the horse into a walk. They left Pendleton behind, following a dusty road that wound through golden grasslands toward the blue shadows of mountains in the distance. The summer sun was climbing higher, promising heat later, but for now the morning was pleasant, the air fresh and clean. Wilhelmina tried to focus on the landscape, instead of the solid warmth of Nash's back against her chest, the way his muscles moved as he guided the horse. This was her husband now. This stranger who had stepped in to rescue her from humiliation. She knew nothing about him except that he kept his word and he had kind eyes and he had loved his mother enough to give Wilhelmina her ring. "Tell me about your family," she said, needing to break the silence. "Thomas mentioned your father in his letters, but not much else." "Not much to tell," Nash said. "My father, Marcus, built our ranch 30 years ago. He married my mother, Catherine, and they had 3 children. My sister Sarah died of fever when she was 12. Then it was just me and Thomas." He paused. "Ma died 2 years ago in childbirth. The baby died too. Pa has not been the same since." "I am sorry," Wilhelmina said softly. "Me too." Nash's voice was rough. "The ranch started going downhill after that. Pa lost his will to fight for it, and Thomas was never interested in the work. I was up in Montana, trying to earn extra money to send home. When I heard Thomas was getting married, I thought maybe it would help, that having a wife would make him grow up, give him a reason to work hard. But he ran instead." "He ran instead," Nash agreed bitterly. "Thomas always ran when things got difficult. I should have known." They rode in silence for a while, Wilhelmina processing this information. She was marrying into a family that was broken and struggling, a ranch that was failing. Part of her wanted to panic, but another part felt a strange sense of purpose. She was good at fixing things, at managing chaos. Maybe she could help here in ways she could never have helped Thomas, who had only wanted a pretty wife to show off. "What about you?" Nash asked, glancing back at her. "Thomas said your parents died. Do you have other family?" "Margaret is my only living relative," Wilhelmina said. "My father died of a heart condition 5 years ago, my mother of influenza 2 years after that. I have been on my own since then, teaching and living in a boarding house." She rested her cheek against Nash's shoulder blade, suddenly exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the past 12 hours. "I wanted more than that. I wanted a home, a family. Thomas's letters made it sound possible." "It is still possible," Nash said quietly, "just different than you planned." Wilhelmina did not answer because she was not sure she believed him. But she held on as they rode deeper into ranch country, toward whatever future waited for her. The Daniels Ranch appeared as they crested a hill. It sat in a valley with a creek running through it, protected by low ridges on either side. The house was a 2-story structure that had once been whitewashed, but now looked tired and faded, with a sagging front porch and windows that needed cleaning. Near the house stood a barn in slightly better repair, several corrals and various outbuildings. "It is not much to look at right now," Nash said, tension creeping into his voice. "But the land is good. We have water rights to the creek and the grazing is decent if we get enough rain. With work, it could be profitable again." "How many head of cattle?" Wilhelmina asked practically. Nash looked surprised by the question. "About 300 right now, down from 600 when Ma was alive. We had to sell off breeding stock to cover expenses." Wilhelmina studied the ranch with a critical eye. She could see the neglect in the fallen fence posts, the weeds growing wild in what had probably once been a kitchen garden, the general air of defeat that hung over the place. But she could also see the potential. The bones were good. The land was beautiful. It just needed people who cared enough to fight for it. "We can work with this," she said. Nash twisted in the saddle to look at her, his blue eyes searching her face. "You mean that? I do not say things I do not mean." Wilhelmina lifted her chin. "You offered me a partnership. I intend to hold up my end." Something like respect flickered across Nash's face. "All right, then. Let us go meet my father." They rode into the yard, scattering chickens. A few scrawny dogs came barking, tails wagging when they recognized Nash. He dismounted and helped Wilhelmina down, his hand steady on her waist. For a moment they stood close together, this man and woman who had sworn vows an hour ago, and Wilhelmina felt the strangeness of it all wash over her again. Then the front door of the house opened, and a man appeared on the porch. Marcus Daniels looked older than Wilhelmina had expected, his hair completely white, his frame stooped. But his eyes were sharp as he took in the sight of Nash and Wilhelmina in her wedding dress. "Where is Thomas?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Gone," Nash said flatly. "Ran off to California last night, so I married Wilhelmina myself." Marcus stared at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, a sound full of disappointment and resignation. "Come inside. You look like you both need coffee." The interior of the house was dim and dusty, with the particular kind of neglect that comes from men living alone without a woman's touch. The furniture was good quality but worn, the floors needed sweeping, and dishes were piled in the kitchen. Wilhelmina took it all in with a practiced eye, already making mental lists of what needed to be done. Marcus poured coffee with shaking hands and sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Nash and Wilhelmina joined him, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "I am sorry about Thomas," Wilhelmina finally said. "I know you had hopes for him taking over the ranch." Marcus laughed bitterly. I stopped having hopes for Thomas years ago. Boy has always been selfish, always looking for the easy way out. He looked at Nash. You came back then. I came back, Nash confirmed. And I am staying. We are going to turn this place around, Pa. We. Marcus looked at Wilhelmina with interest. Wilhelmina is my wife now, Nash said, and Wilhelmina heard the protective edge in his voice. She is part of this family, part of this ranch. We are partners in this. Marcus studied Wilhelmina for a long moment, and she met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. Finally, the old man nodded. All right. Welcome to the family, Wilhelmina. I hope you know what you are getting into. I am learning, Wilhelmina said dryly, which made Marcus's lips twitch in what might have been the start of a smile. They spent the next hour discussing the state of the ranch. Marcus laid out the finances with brutal honesty. They were deep in debt, behind on the mortgage, and had barely enough cash to make it through winter. They needed to increase the herd, fix the infrastructure, and find ways to cut costs, all while somehow making enough money to keep the bank from foreclosing. It was a daunting picture, but Wilhelmina had managed tight budgets before. As they talked, she started to see possibilities. Ways to stretch dollars, to prioritize repairs, to make strategic choices about what to keep and what to let go. We need to think about efficiency, she said, tapping the ledger Marcus had produced. You are spending too much on feed because your hay crop is poor. If we focus on improving the hay fields first, we can reduce costs over winter. And these expenses for equipment repairs are excessive. We should learn to do more ourselves. Both men stared at her. You know about hay crops and equipment? Nash asked. I know about economics and common sense, Wilhelmina replied. The specifics I can learn. I am a fast study. Marcus actually smiled then, his weathered face transforming. Boy, I think you married yourself a partner, not just a wife. Nash looked at Wilhelmina, and she saw something warm kindle in his eyes. I think you are right, Pa. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of activity. Margaret arrived with Wilhelmina's trunks and a wagon full of wedding gifts from townspeople, who apparently felt sorry for the jilted bride. Wilhelmina thanked her cousin and sent her back to town with assurances that she was fine, though Margaret left with obvious reluctance and worry. Then Wilhelmina changed out of her wedding dress into a practical work dress and set about making the house habitable. She swept and scrubbed, did dishes, aired out musty rooms, and started planning meals from the sparse supplies in the pantry. Nash and Marcus worked outside, tending to animals and checking fences, but Nash kept coming back to the house on various pretenses, checking on her. I am fine, Wilhelmina finally told him when he appeared for the fourth time. I do not need supervision. I know. Nash leaned against the doorframe, watching her sweep the kitchen floor. I just wanted to make sure you are all right. This is a lot of change in one day. Wilhelmina paused, pushing a strand of hair out of her face. It is, but I am managing. You are doing more than managing. You are transforming this place already. She looked around at the clean kitchen, the organized shelves, the pot of stew already simmering on the stove. This is the easy part. The ranch itself will be harder. We will figure it out together. Nash hesitated, then said, I know this is not the wedding night you imagined. When you are ready to retire, I will sleep in the barn. You can have my room. Wilhelmina's cheeks heated. She had not let herself think about the intimate aspects of marriage, about what Nash might expect from her. Where will your father sleep? He has the downstairs bedroom. Mine is upstairs. There is a guest room too, though it needs work. You do not have to sleep in the barn, Wilhelmina said carefully. The guest room might be better if we can make it habitable. Nash nodded slowly. I will fix it up tomorrow. For tonight, the barn is fine. I have slept in worse places. He left before Wilhelmina could respond, and she stood alone in the kitchen, wondering at the strange courtesy of this man she had married. He had taken vows to her that morning, but he was giving her space, not pressing his rights as a husband. It made her feel safer, but also confused. What kind of marriage would this be? That night, after a quiet dinner where Marcus actually complimented her cooking, Wilhelmina climbed the stairs to Nash's bedroom. It was sparse and masculine, with a simple bed, a dresser, and little else. But it was clean, and the window looked out over the valley toward the mountains. She changed into her nightgown and slipped between sheets that smelled of sage and something distinctly Nash. Then she lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, and wondered what Thomas was doing in California. Was he relieved to have escaped? Did he feel any guilt for what he had done? And what about Nash, sleeping in the barn instead of in his own bed? Why had he really offered to marry her? There was something he was not telling her, some pain in his past that he had hinted at. Wilhelmina wanted to know what it was, but she also understood that trust took time to build. She closed her eyes, her hand unconsciously going to the gold ring on her finger, and finally slept. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was exhausting but satisfying. Wilhelmina woke before dawn every day to cook breakfast for Nash and Marcus, then spent her mornings working in the house and her afternoons learning ranch work. Nash proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to tend chickens, milk cows, work in the garden she was resurrecting, and even how to handle horses. "You have good instincts," he told her one afternoon as she successfully saddled Daisy by herself. "Most city folks are afraid of horses, but you are not." "I am afraid," Wilhelmina admitted, stroking Daisy's neck. "I am just doing it anyway." Nash smiled, and Wilhelmina's heart did a strange little flip. She had been trying not to notice how handsome he was, how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how strong his arms looked when he worked. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, not a real marriage. But it was getting harder to remember that when Nash was so kind, so patient, so present. He had fixed up the guest room within 2 days, but he still slept there instead of with her. Sometimes Wilhelmina lay awake at night, listening to him move around in the room down the hall, and wondered what it would be like if their marriage was real in all ways. But she did not dare suggest it. Nash had given his word that she would have freedom, and she sensed he would never push for more than she was willing to give. Marcus's health remained fragile, but his spirits improved as the ranch slowly came back to life. Wilhelmina's careful budgeting and Nash's hard work were making a difference. They fixed fences, improved pastures, and started rebuilding their cattle herd with strategic purchases at auction. The townspeople of Pendleton gradually accepted Wilhelmina as Nash's wife. She made trips into town for supplies, always riding Daisy now with increasing confidence, and endured the curious stares and whispered conversations. Some women were kind, inviting her to church socials and quilting circles. Others were coldly judgmental, convinced that Wilhelmina must be improper somehow to have switched grooms so readily. Wilhelmina did not care. She had Nash's respect and Marcus's growing affection, and that was enough. One evening in late August, Wilhelmina was working in the kitchen garden when she heard horses approaching fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the setting sun, and saw 3 riders coming hard toward the ranch house. Nash emerged from the barn, his body tense with alertness. The riders proved to be local ranchers, men Wilhelmina had met briefly in town. Their leader, a man named Jack Porter, pulled up his horse in a cloud of dust. "Nash, we have trouble," Porter said without preamble. "Rustlers hit my place last night, took 20 head of my best cattle. Tom Welch lost 15 head 2 nights before that. We are forming a group to track them down, and we need every man we can get." Nash's jaw tightened. "When do we ride?" "Now. Trail is getting cold. Give me 5 minutes." Nash turned and nearly collided with Wilhelmina, who had come up behind him. "I have to go," he said quietly. "This is serious. Rustlers can destroy a ranch, I know." Wilhelmina kept her voice steady even though fear was curling in her stomach. "How long will you be gone?" "I do not know. Could be a day, could be a week, depending on where the trail leads." Nash glanced back at Porter and his companions, then looked at Wilhelmina with clear reluctance. "Will you be all right here with Pa? We will be fine. Go." Wilhelmina wanted to touch him, to hold on to him, but she did not have that right. They were partners, not lovers. "Be careful." Something flickered in Nash's eyes, something that looked almost like disappointment. But he just nodded, squeezed her shoulder briefly, and went to saddle his horse. 10 minutes later he was gone, riding off with the group of ranchers into the growing darkness. Wilhelmina stood in the yard, watching until they disappeared, and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. "He will be fine," Marcus said from the porch. "Nash is smart and careful. He will come back. I know." But Wilhelmina could not shake her worry as she went back into the house. The next 5 days were some of the longest of Wilhelmina's life. She threw herself into work, keeping busy so she would not have time to imagine Nash injured or worse. She and Marcus managed the ranch between them, working longer hours to cover Nash's absence. At night, Wilhelmina lay awake in Nash's bed, staring at the ceiling and praying for his safe return. On the 6th day, riders appeared on the horizon. Wilhelmina's heart leaped as she recognized Nash's roan gelding. She dropped the basket of eggs she was carrying and ran toward him, not caring how it looked. Nash swung down from his horse, filthy and exhausted, and caught Wilhelmina as she reached him. She wrapped her arms around him without thinking, pressing her face against his dusty chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady. "You are back," she breathed. "Thank God you are back." Nash's arms came around her, holding her tight. "I am back," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I am sorry I worried you." Wilhelmina pulled back, suddenly aware of what she had done. "Did you catch them? The rustlers?" "We did. There were 5 of them, hiding up in the foothills. We recovered most of the cattle and turned the rustlers over to the sheriff." Nash swayed slightly, and Wilhelmina realized he was about to fall over from exhaustion. "Come inside. You need food and rest." She helped him into the house, bullying him into sitting at the kitchen table while she heated water for a bath and prepared a plate of food. Nash ate like he was starving, then let Wilhelmina lead him upstairs to the bathing room. "I can manage from here," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "I am sure you can, but I am going to stay anyway." Wilhelmina busied herself with towels while Nash stripped off his filthy clothes and sank into the hot water with a groan of relief. She kept her eyes averted, giving him privacy, but she did not leave. "Wilhelmina," Nash said after a long moment, "why did you run to me like that when I came back?" She could have lied, could have made up some practical excuse, but she was tired of pretending. "Because I was worried about you, because I missed you. Because even though this started as a business arrangement, you have become important to me." The water sloshed as Nash sat up. "Look at me." Wilhelmina turned to face him, her cheeks flushing. Nash was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You have become important to me too," he said quietly. "More than important. These past months working beside you, living in the same house, building something together. I have been falling for you, Wilhelmina. I did not mean to. I know that was not our agreement, but I cannot help it." Wilhelmina's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "Nash, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything." Nash stood, water streaming off him, and reached for a towel. "I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give. I just wanted you to know the truth. When I was out there tracking rustlers, all I could think about was getting back to you. That is when I knew this had stopped being just a partnership for me." He wrapped the towel around his waist and walked past her toward his bedroom. Wilhelmina stood frozen, her mind whirling. Nash loved her. Or he was falling in love with her, at least. And she realized with startling clarity that she felt the same way. Somewhere between the practical discussions about cattle and the quiet dinners and the patient riding lessons, she had fallen for her husband. She followed him to the bedroom, finding him sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. "Nash," she said softly. He looked up, and Wilhelmina saw vulnerability in his eyes that made her chest ache. "This is your room," she said. "This is your bed. You should not be sleeping down the hall anymore." Nash's breath caught. "Wilhelmina, you do not have to say that just because I told you how I feel. I am not saying it because of that." She crossed the room and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble under her palms. "I am saying it because I want you here, because I trust you, because I think I might be falling in love with you too." "You think?" Nash asked, his lips quirking in a small smile. "I am fairly certain," Wilhelmina amended. And then Nash was pulling her down onto his lap, kissing her properly for the first time since their wedding day. This kiss was nothing like that chaste peck in the church. It was deep and searching and full of weeks of suppressed longing. Wilhelmina kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Stay with me tonight," Nash said against her lips. "Let this be real." "It already is real," Wilhelmina whispered. "It has been for weeks." Nash laughed, the sound full of joy and relief, and kissed her again. That night, their marriage became real in every sense. Nash was gentle and patient, making sure Wilhelmina was comfortable every step of the way. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. "Tell me," she said quietly. "Tell me what happened to you before. You said you knew what it felt like to have your plans destroyed." Nash's hand stilled where it had been stroking her hair. For a moment, Wilhelmina thought he would not answer. Then he sighed. "I was engaged once 3 years ago. Her name was Elizabeth. We grew up together, planned to marry as soon as I could afford to build us a house." His voice was carefully neutral, but Wilhelmina could hear the old pain underneath. Then she met a businessman from Portland who could offer her a life in the city, fancy dresses, all the things I could never give her. She broke our engagement and left. "I am sorry," Wilhelmina said, tilting her head to look up at him. "That must have hurt terribly." "It did. Made me think I was not enough, that I would never be enough for anyone." Nash met her gaze. "But then you came along and you did not need me to be anything except honest and hardworking. You saw me as a partner, not as a means to an end. That is why I married you, Wilhelmina, not just to save the ranch or give you a place to land, but because I saw in you someone I could build a real life with." Wilhelmina's eyes filled with tears. "Nash Daniels, I think I love you." "No more thinking," Nash said, smiling. "I know I love you." They kissed again, sealing the words, and Wilhelmina felt something settle deep in her soul. This was where she belonged, not with Thomas, who had wanted an ornament, but with Nash, who wanted a partner, a companion, a true wife. The months that followed were the happiest of Wilhelmina's life. She and Nash worked side by side every day, rebuilding the ranch with sweat and determination. They celebrated their first small successes: a good hay crop, healthy calves born in the spring, the mortgage payment made on time. They weathered setbacks too: a harsh winter, a sick cow, the constant struggle to make ends meet. But through it all they had each other. Nash taught Wilhelmina to ride like a proper ranch woman, to rope cattle, even to shoot. Wilhelmina taught Nash to read better, improved his manners, and made their house into a real home with curtains and fresh flowers and good cooking. Marcus's health stabilized with proper care and regular meals. He became less of a burden and more of a help, his expertise invaluable when making decisions about the ranch. He and Wilhelmina developed a warm relationship, and he often told her she was the daughter he never had. In Pendleton, Wilhelmina gradually won over even her harshest critics. She was too capable, too hardworking, too clearly devoted to Nash for people to continue disapproving. She joined the Church Ladies' Society, helped at community barn raisings, and became known as someone you could count on. Margaret visited often, eventually accepting that Wilhelmina had made the right choice. "You are glowing," she told Wilhelmina during one visit in the spring of 1884. "Marriage to Nash agrees with you." "It does," Wilhelmina agreed, watching Nash work with a new horse in the corral. "I never expected to be this happy." "Have you heard from Thomas?" Margaret asked carefully. "No, and I do not want to." Wilhelmina had no interest in her former intended. She had written him out of her story completely. "He did me a favor by running. If he had stayed, I never would have found Nash." In late summer of 1884, Wilhelmina realized she was pregnant. She told Nash one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and she would never forget the look of pure joy on his face. "A baby," he breathed, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. We are." Wilhelmina covered his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it." Nash pulled her close, kissing her temple. "You have given me everything, Wilhelmina. A real marriage, a real partner, and now a family. I love you so much." "I love you too," Wilhelmina said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Their son was born in March of 1885, arriving during a late snowstorm that had Nash pacing the house like a caged animal while Marcus sat with Wilhelmina upstairs. The doctor from town barely made it through the snow, but once he arrived, the birth went smoothly. When Nash was finally allowed into the room, he approached the bed with reverent steps, his eyes locked on the tiny bundle in Wilhelmina's arms. "Meet your son," she said softly, pulling back the blanket so Nash could see the baby's face. Nash sat on the edge of the bed, his hands shaking as he touched the baby's downy head. "He is perfect. You are perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never settled on one. Now, looking at her husband's awestruck face, Wilhelmina knew. "Nathan," she said. Nathan Marcus Daniels, after both his father and grandfather. Nash's eyes filled with tears. "Nathan," he repeated. "It is perfect." Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up when he saw his grandson. "A boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "A strong, healthy boy." Catherine would have been so proud. The old man held his grandson with gentle hands, and Wilhelmina saw 3 generations of Daniel's men together, bound by blood and love, and the land they all fought for. Life with a baby was exhausting but joyful. Nathan was a good-natured child who grew strong and healthy under Wilhelmina's devoted care. Nash proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, always making time to hold his son despite the constant demands of ranch work. The ranch continued to thrive. By 1886, they had expanded their herd to 500 head and were turning a steady profit. Nash bought more land, extending their boundaries, securing their future. Wilhelmina managed the household finances with an iron hand, ensuring they always had savings, always had a cushion against disaster. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men from town who were glad to have steady employment. Nash trained them carefully, building a team he could trust. In the summer of 1887, Wilhelmina became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. Their second son, William Marcus Daniels, was born in February of 1888, another healthy boy with Nash's blue eyes and Wilhelmina's determination. Marcus died peacefully in his sleep 2 months later, his work done, his legacy secure. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and Nash grieved for the father who had built something real out of raw land and sweat. "He was proud of you," Wilhelmina told Nash as they stood by the grave. "Proud of what we have built together." "I know." Nash pulled her close, little Nathan holding his hand and baby William in Wilhelmina's arms. "He told me the day before he died that marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did, that you saved this family." "We saved each other," Wilhelmina corrected. As the years passed, the Daniels Ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Nash's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher grew, and people sought his advice on cattle breeding and land management. Wilhelmina became known for her business acumen, helping other ranch wives learn to manage household finances and budgets. Nathan and William grew into strong, capable boys who loved the ranch as much as their parents did. Wilhelmina taught them to read and write, giving them the education she had valued so much. Nash taught them to ride and rope and understand the land. In 1890, Wilhelmina gave birth to a daughter, Catherine Marie, named for Nash's mother. The little girl had red gold hair like Wilhelmina's and a smile that could light up a room. Nash completely melted around his daughter, unable to deny her anything. "You are going to spoil her," Wilhelmina scolded, watching Nash carry 3-year-old Catherine around on his shoulders while she squealed with delight. "That is my job as her father," Nash replied, grinning. "Besides, with 2 older brothers, she is going to need some spoiling." Life was good. Better than good. Wilhelmina sometimes thought back to that awful morning when she found Thomas's note, when she thought her life was over. She had been so wrong. Her life had not ended that day. It had just been waiting to truly begin. One evening in the fall of 1891, Nash and Wilhelmina sat on the porch together, watching their children play in the yard. Nathan was 8 now, William was 3, and baby Catherine was toddling after her brothers with determined steps. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Thomas had not run?" Nash asked, his arm around Wilhelmina's shoulders. "Sometimes," Wilhelmina admitted, "but I do not waste much time on it. Thomas did us a favor even if he did not mean to." "He did." Nash kissed her temple. "Because this right here is everything I ever wanted. A real marriage with a woman I love, children who are healthy and happy, a ranch that is thriving. I could not ask for more. Neither could I." Wilhelmina leaned into him, content. "We built something good, Nash, something lasting. We did. And we are going to keep building it for our children and their children." Nash squeezed her hand. "I love you, Wilhelmina Daniels. Best decision I ever made was marrying you." "I love you too," Wilhelmina said, and watched the sun set over their land, their home, their life together. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. In 1893, a severe drought tested the ranch's resources, but Nash's careful water management and Wilhelmina's strict budgeting saw them through. Other ranches failed, but the Daniels place endured. Nathan grew into a serious, responsible young man who clearly would take over the ranch one day. William was the charmer, quick with a smile and always finding new ways to get into mischief. Catherine was bright and determined, insisting that Wilhelmina teach her everything she knew about running a household and managing finances. "I want to be like you, Mama," Catherine said when she was 7. "Smart and strong." Wilhelmina's heart swelled with pride. Her daughter would not be confined to traditional roles if she did not want to be. Wilhelmina made sure all her children could read, write, and think critically, regardless of whether society thought it was proper. In 1895, word finally reached them about Thomas. He had died in a bar fight in San Francisco, drunk and broke. The news came through Henry Thornton, who heard it from a traveling merchant. Nash received the information with little emotion. "I stopped thinking of him as my brother years ago," he told Wilhelmina that night. "He made his choices. I made mine. I got the better deal by far." Wilhelmina agreed. She felt a brief moment of sadness for the life Thomas had wasted, but mostly she felt grateful. Grateful that he had run, grateful that Nash had stepped up, grateful for every twist of fate that had led her to this life. As the new century approached, the Daniels Ranch was firmly established as one of the premier cattle operations in eastern Oregon. Nash had expanded their holdings significantly, buying up neighboring properties as they became available. They employed a dozen ranch hands year-round now, and the house had been expanded and improved until it was truly impressive. But despite their prosperity, Nash and Wilhelmina never lost sight of what mattered most. They remained devoted to each other and to their children, putting family above profit, love above ambition. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1898, Nash took Wilhelmina back to Pendleton for a special dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. As they walked through the streets afterward, arm in arm, Wilhelmina thought about how much had changed since that terrible morning when Thomas ran. "What are you thinking about?" Nash asked, always attuned to her moods. "About how we started," Wilhelmina said. "About how scared I was that morning, how lost I felt, and about how you offered me a lifeline when I needed it most." "We offered each other a lifeline," Nash corrected. "You saved me just as much as I saved you." "I suppose we did." Wilhelmina stopped walking and turned to face her husband. At 38, Nash was even more handsome than he had been at 28, his face weathered by sun and wind but his eyes still clear and kind. "I love you, Nash Daniels. I am so grateful Thomas ran because it led me to you." Nash cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "I love you too. Best 15 years of my life." They kissed there on the street, not caring who saw, and Wilhelmina felt the same rush of emotion she always felt when Nash touched her. Their love had not faded with time. If anything, it had grown deeper, richer, strengthened by years of partnership and shared struggle. In 1901, Nathan turned 16 and officially became his father's partner in running the ranch. He was already as tall as Nash and could work as hard as any grown man. Nash trusted him with increasing responsibility, proud of the man his son was becoming. William announced at 14 that he wanted to be a lawyer, not a rancher. Nash was initially disappointed, but Wilhelmina talked him around. "Let him find his own path," she said. "We have Nathan to take over the ranch. William should follow his dreams." Nash agreed, and they sent William to school in Portland, supporting his ambitions even though it meant having one less son at home. Catherine, at 11, was already showing signs of being as capable as her mother. She followed Wilhelmina everywhere, learning to cook, to sew, to manage accounts, to handle the thousands of details that went into running a successful ranch household. In 1903, tragedy struck when Nathan was thrown from a horse during a roundup. For 3 terrible days, he lay unconscious, while Wilhelmina prayed and Nash blamed himself for letting his son take on dangerous work. But Nathan pulled through, waking with a splitting headache but otherwise unharmed. "You have to be more careful," Wilhelmina scolded, tears streaming down her face as she held her son's hand. "You scared me half to death." "Sorry, Ma," Nathan said with a weak smile. I will be more careful." The incident made both Nash and Wilhelmina realize how precious and fragile life was. They held their children a little tighter, told them, "I love you" a little more often, and never took a single day for granted. As the years rolled on, the Daniels family became a cornerstone of the Pendleton community. They contributed to the church, supported local businesses, and helped their neighbors in times of trouble. Wilhelmina was elected president of the Ladies' Auxiliary, using her position to advocate for better schools and resources for the community. Nash served as an advisor to younger ranchers, freely sharing the knowledge he had accumulated over decades. He was respected not just for his success, but for his integrity and fairness in all his dealings. In 1906, Nathan married a local girl named Emma Richardson, a sweet-natured young woman who loved ranch life as much as he did. The wedding was a joyous celebration, with half of Pendleton in attendance. Wilhelmina watched her son take his vows and remembered her own wedding day, how different it had been, how uncertain. "Our son is married," she whispered to Nash as they watched Nathan and Emma dance. "He is." Nash squeezed her hand, "and he chose better than I did initially." "You did not choose at all," Wilhelmina reminded him. "You made a desperate gamble, best gamble of my life." Nash pulled her onto the dance floor, and it paid off beyond my wildest dreams. A year later, Nathan and Emma presented them with their first grandchild, a baby boy they named Marcus Nash Daniels. Wilhelmina held her grandson for the first time and felt the circle of life completing itself. This child was the future of the ranch, the continuation of everything she and Nash had built. "Your grandfather would have loved to meet you," she whispered to the sleeping baby. Nash stood behind her, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "We did good, Willie." She smiled at the nickname he only used in their most private moments. "We did very good." William returned from Portland in 1908 with his law degree and news that he had been offered a position with a prestigious firm. Nash and Wilhelmina were proud, though they missed having him at the ranch. "I will visit often," William promised. "And when you need legal help with the ranch, I am your man." Catherine, at 18, shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to go to teachers' college. Nash was initially resistant, not wanting his daughter to leave, but Wilhelmina supported the decision. "I went west to find my own way," she reminded Nash. "Let Catherine do the same." Reluctantly, Nash agreed, and Catherine enrolled in a teacher's program in Pendleton, living at home but pursuing her education with fierce determination. In 1910, Nash turned 50, and Wilhelmina threw him a surprise party that brought together everyone they knew. As Nash stood in his own barn, surrounded by friends and family and neighbors, he looked over at Wilhelmina and mouthed, "I love you." She mouthed it back, her heart full. They had been married 27 years now, and their love had only grown stronger. They still worked side by side every day, still shared their hopes and fears, still found comfort in each other's arms at night. Their partnership had become the stuff of local legend, the story of the bride whose groom ran and the cowboy brother who stepped up and said, "I will stay." In 1912, Catherine married a young doctor named Peter Hamilton who had come to Pendleton to set up a practice. The wedding was beautiful, and Wilhelmina cried as her daughter promised to love, honor, and cherish her husband. "She will be happy," Nash assured Wilhelmina later as they cleaned up after the reception. "Peter is a good man. I know. I just miss her already." Wilhelmina wiped her eyes. "When did our babies grow up?" "When we were not looking." Nash pulled her close. "But we still have each other. That is what matters most." Nathan and Emma had 3 children by 1915, and the ranch house echoed with the sound of grandchildren playing. Wilhelmina loved having the little ones around, spoiling them the way Nash had spoiled Catherine. The ranch continued to prosper. They had weathered economic downturns, droughts, harsh winters, and all the other challenges that came with ranching. Their success was built on hard work, smart decisions, and the strong partnership between Nash and Wilhelmina. In the spring of 1918, as they approached their 35th wedding anniversary, Nash had a surprise for Wilhelmina. He took her out to a beautiful spot on the ranch, a hillside with a view of the entire valley, and showed her the house he was having built there. "I thought we could use a place that is just ours," he explained. "Nathan is running the ranch now. He and Emma deserve the main house. We can retire to this cottage and enjoy watching our grandchildren grow up without being underfoot." Wilhelmina looked at the partially constructed house with its wide porch and large windows designed to catch the view. "Nash, this is beautiful. It is our reward for all those years of hard work." Nash wrapped his arms around her from behind. "A place where we can spend our golden years together." They moved into the new cottage in the fall of 1918, and it became their sanctuary. The main house was given to Nathan and Emma, who had expanded the family with 2 more children. William visited regularly from Portland, bringing his new wife Sarah to meet the family. Catherine and Peter had a daughter and were expecting another child. The Daniels legacy was secure, spreading through multiple generations now, all of them rooted in the land Nash and Wilhelmina had fought so hard to save. In 1920, Pendleton decided to honor Nash and Wilhelmina for their contributions to the community. At a special ceremony during the annual Roundup celebration, the mayor presented them with a plaque recognizing their years of service and leadership. "Nash and Wilhelmina Daniels represent the best of what this community can be," the mayor said. "They built their success through hard work, integrity, and partnership. They have raised fine children who contribute to our society. They have helped their neighbors in times of trouble and shared their prosperity. We are honored to have them as part of Pendleton." The crowd applauded, and Wilhelmina felt Nash's hand tighten around hers. They stood together to accept the honor, 2 people who had started with nothing but determination and had built an empire of sorts. But more importantly, they had built a love story that had lasted through decades of challenges and triumphs. That night, as they sat on the porch of their cottage watching the stars come out, Wilhelmina thought back to that terrible morning 37 years ago. She had stood in a hotel room in her wedding dress, her world destroyed, her future uncertain, and then Nash had walked through the door and said, "I will stay." Those 3 words had changed everything. They had given her hope when she had none, a future when she thought all was lost, and eventually, a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Nash asked, always able to read her moods even after all these years. "About us. About how we started and where we ended up." Wilhelmina leaned her head on his shoulder. "I was just remembering that morning how you showed up and offered to marry me. I thought you were insane." Nash chuckled. "I probably was, but it was the best insanity I ever embraced." "Do you ever regret it? Tying yourself to a woman you barely knew?" "Not for one single second." Nash lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the gold band that had belonged to his mother. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Willie. You saved me from becoming bitter after Elizabeth left. You gave me a real partnership, real love, a real family. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Wilhelmina's eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Nash Daniels. Thank you for staying. I love you too, and Willie." Nash smiled at her in the starlight. "I am still here. I am still staying. I always will." They kissed, these two people who had built a life from the ashes of disappointment, and Wilhelmina knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new sorrows. In 1923, William and Sarah had their first child, a son they named Nash after his grandfather. Nash was so touched he cried when he held his namesake for the first time. Catherine became a beloved teacher in Pendleton, known for her dedication and her insistence that girls receive the same quality education as boys. She had 3 children with Peter, all of whom showed signs of inheriting their mother's intelligence and determination. Nathan proved to be as capable a rancher as his father, expanding the operation even further and introducing new breeding techniques that improved the quality of their cattle. He and Emma had 5 children in total, and the ranch house was always full of noise and laughter. By 1925, Nash and Wilhelmina had 10 grandchildren, with more on the way. Their cottage became a favorite destination for the little ones, who loved hearing Grandpa Nash's stories about the old days and eating Grandma Wilhelmina's famous cookies. Nash's health remained good despite his age, though he moved a little slower than he used to. Wilhelmina, at 63, was still sharp and energetic, managing household accounts for both the cottage and the main ranch house, always keeping a careful eye on finances. In the summer of 1928, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary with a huge party that brought together 3 generations of Daniel's family, plus half the town of Pendleton. As Nash and Wilhelmina danced together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, they both felt the weight of their blessings. 45 years, Wilhelmina marveled. How did we get so lucky? It was not luck, Nash corrected, pulling her closer. It was choice. We chose to work together, to build together, to love each other through good times and bad. That is what made this possible. You are right. Wilhelmina smiled up at her husband, seeing the silver in his hair, but also the same kind, honest eyes that had looked at her across a hotel room 4.5 decades ago. We built something real, Nash, something lasting. We did. And it is going to last long after we are gone, through our children and grandchildren and all the generations to come. As the sun set over the ranch that had been the stage for their love story, Nash and Wilhelmina held each other close and felt the satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a legacy that would endure. In 1930, tragedy struck when Emma died suddenly of a fever. Nathan was devastated, lost without his wife of 24 years. Nash and Wilhelmina moved back into the main house temporarily to help with the children and support their grieving son. I do not know how to do this without her, Nathan said one night, his voice breaking. Wilhelmina held her son while he cried, remembering her own fears when she first came west. You put one foot in front of the other. You keep going because your children need you. You honor Emma's memory by living well and raising your children to be good people. How did you do it? Nathan asked. How did you build such a strong marriage with Pa when you started as strangers? We chose each other every single day, Wilhelmina said simply. Marriage is not just the wedding day. It is the choice to stay, to work through problems, to build something together. Your father and I made that choice 47 years ago, and we have kept making it ever since. Nathan slowly healed, supported by his parents and his children. He never remarried, content to focus on the ranch and his family. His children grew into strong, capable adults who honored their mother's memory by living lives of purpose and integrity. By 1933, Nash was 73 and finally starting to slow down significantly. He had turned over all ranch operations to Nathan years ago, but he still liked to ride out and check on things, still wanted to be involved. Wilhelmina worried about him but knew better than to try to stop him. The ranch was in his blood, would be until the day he died. That day came in the fall of 1933 when Nash was out riding his beloved roan gelding. He had a heart attack on the trail and died quickly, painlessly, under the wide Oregon sky he loved. Wilhelmina was shattered. For 50 years, Nash had been her partner, her companion, her great love. Half a century of shared life, shared work, shared dreams. Now he was gone, and the world felt wrong without him. They buried him on the hillside next to his parents, overlooking the ranch he had built into something remarkable. The entire town of Pendleton came to the funeral, along with ranchers from all over Oregon who had respected Nash for his integrity and skill. As Wilhelmina stood by the grave, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, she thought about the morning Nash had walked into her hotel room and offered to stay. He had kept that promise for 50 years, staying through every challenge, every triumph, every ordinary day. He had been her rock, her love, her partner in every sense of the word. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered, placing a single white rose on his coffin. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for staying." Wilhelmina lived for another 7 years after Nash's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, watching the ranch continue to thrive under Nathan's capable management. She wrote her memoirs, telling the story of how she came west to marry one man and ended up with another, building a love that lasted a lifetime. The story became famous in Pendleton and beyond, a testament to the power of second chances and the courage it takes to say yes to the unexpected. When Wilhelmina died peacefully in her sleep in 1940 at the age of 78, she was buried next to Nash on the hillside. Their joint headstone read, "Nash and Wilhelmina Daniels, partners in life, united in love, 1883–1940. Their children gathered at the graveside, along with grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. Nathan, now 65 himself, placed flowers on both graves and told the youngest generation the story one more time. "Your great-grandfather's brother was supposed to marry your great-grandmother," he said. "But he ran away the night before the wedding. Your great-grandfather stepped up and said, 'I will stay.' He kept that promise for 50 years, and together they built all of this." Nathan gestured to the ranch spread out below them, prosperous and thriving. "They built our family, our legacy, our future. Everything we have is because they chose each other and chose to work together." As the family returned to the ranch house for the wake, the youngest great-grandchildren played in the yard where Wilhelmina had once chased chickens and learned to be a rancher's wife. The land that Nash and Wilhelmina had fought so hard to save was now home to 4 generations of Daniel's family, all of them benefiting from the partnership that had started with a desperate proposal in a hotel room. The story of Wilhelmina Foster and Nash Daniels became part of local legend, told and retold around Pendleton for generations. The tale of the bride whose groom ran off the night before their wedding, and the cowboy brother who stepped up and said, "I will stay," became a symbol of true love, commitment, and the unexpected ways life can lead us to exactly where we need to be. Their descendants continued to ranch the land, generation after generation, always remembering the foundation that had been laid by 2 people who chose to take a chance on each other when they both needed it most. The Daniels Ranch remained one of the most successful operations in eastern Oregon, a lasting testament to what can be built when 2 people commit to true partnership. In the main house, a portrait hung over the fireplace showing Nash and Wilhelmina in their later years, sitting together on the porch of their cottage. Anyone who looked at that picture could see the deep love and respect between them, the strength of a bond forged through decades of shared life. And on the hillside overlooking the valley, two headstones stood side by side, marking the final resting place of the couple who had built something extraordinary from the ashes of disappointment. Their legacy lived on not just in the land or the cattle or the buildings, but in the family they had created together, in the love that had lasted a lifetime, and in the story that would be told for generations to come. A story that began with betrayal, but became a testament to faithfulness. A story that started with a desperate proposal, but grew into a love affair for the ages. A story that proved sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true love is not about perfect beginnings, but about choosing to stay, to work, to build something real together. Nash had walked into that hotel room in 1883 and said, "I will stay," never knowing that those 3 words would change both their lives forever. But he had kept his word, staying through 50 years of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, always there, always faithful, always present. And Wilhelmina had taken a leap of faith, trusting a stranger to honor his promises, and found instead a soulmate, a partner, and the love of her life. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and loss. But it also continued, through the children they raised, the legacy they built, and the example they set for what real marriage, real partnership, and real love could be. In the end, Thomas Daniels's cowardice had given his brother and his intended bride the greatest gift possible: each other. The groom who ran off the night before became nothing more than a footnote in history, while the cowboy brother who stepped up and said, "I will stay," became the hero of a love story that lasted beyond death itself. And if you visit Pendleton, Oregon, even today, you can find the old Daniels Ranch still operating under the care of their descendants. You can see the hillside where Nash and Wilhelmina are buried, their graves always decorated with fresh flowers left by family members who never forget the foundation on which their lives are built. The story lives on, a reminder that sometimes the best answer to disappointment is not to give up, but to step up, to say, "I will stay" when everything seems impossible, to choose partnership over perfection, commitment over convenience, and love over fear. Nash and Wilhelmina did exactly that, and in doing so they built something that outlasted both of them: a family, a legacy, and a love story for the ages. Their tale serves as proof that true love is not found but built, not instant but earned, not easy but worth every moment of effort. On summer evenings, when the sun sets over the blue mountains and paints the sky in shades of gold and crimson, you can almost imagine them still there on their cottage porch, holding hands and watching the land they loved so much. Two souls who found each other against all odds, who built a life from nothing, and who loved each other until their very last breaths. The groom ran off the night before the wedding, but his brother stepped up and said, "I will stay." And in staying, Nash Daniels found the love of his life, built a legacy that would last generations, and proved that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest promise faithfully kept. Their story is over, but their love lives on in every sunrise over the ranch, in every descendant who works the land they saved, in every couple who hears their tale and is inspired to build something real together. Nash and Wilhelmina's love was not perfect, but it was true. Not easy, but lasting. Not what either of them planned, but exactly what they both needed. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.